So, welcome to the KTHGEF, the educational forum of King Khalid Eye Specialist Hospital, which take place every week. I'm Adel Akeely. I'm a member of the Retina Division, and I will be moderating today along with Dr. Rola Abbad. She recently joined us from Moorfields. She's a medical retina consultant who specializes in inherited retinal diseases, especially interested in electrophysiology and psychophysiology. She also was before that in the University of Toronto, and she was kind to extend our invitation to our guest today. I will leave the introduction for her. I just want to mention that we are opening the Q&A for anyone to ask their questions. We'll be addressing those at the end. Dr. Rola, I'll leave the mic to you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Piers Keen. He's a very well-known figure, but nevertheless, it gives us the honor. He gave us the honor to introduce him to the audience here. He's a consultant ophthalmologist at Moorfields Eye Hospital in London, UK, and he's also an associate professor at University College London Institute of Ophthalmology. He is originally from Ireland, and he received his medical degree from University College Dublin. And in 2016, he initiated the formal collaboration between Moorfields Eye Hospital and Google DeepMind, with the aim of developing artificial intelligence algorithms for the earlier detection and treatment of retinal disease. In August 2018, the first results of his collaboration were published in the journal Nature Medicine. And in October 2019, he was included on the Evening Standard Progress 1000 list of most influential Londoners. It's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Piers Keen, and without further ado, I will leave the floor to him to talk.
Thank you, Rola, for the very nice introduction. I'd like to first begin by thanking you, Rola and Adel, for this invitation. It's really something I think quite wonderful that you're putting together to organize these seminars, particularly in the context of the global pandemic. So I'm really looking forward to talking, and hopefully the presentation that I'll give will stimulate some nice conversation. And the other thing I'd like to highlight, just given the audience, is that it's really been a privilege at Moorfields that I've been able to work with some superb ophthalmologists from Saudi, and people like you, Rola, and others like Abdul Rahman Al Saidi and Abdul Rahman Ablushi. And I think also more broadly, I'm very proud of the fact that I've got a very diverse and global research group at Moorfields with other extremely talented ophthalmologists from the Middle East. And so in particular, I think of my colleague Hagar Khalid from Egypt. So I want to say this at the start because I'm always interested in if there's rising stars who are interested in coming to spend time at London, please do get in contact with me, and my email address will be at the end, and I do try to answer all my emails. So without further ado, the title for my presentation is Artificial Intelligence in Ophthalmology, Reinventing the Eye Examination. And although I think that there's a lot of hype around artificial intelligence, and some of it is probably hype, I think that actually this is a technology that does have a huge amount of potential to transform ophthalmology. In fact, I think it will transform healthcare. And in fact, I think ophthalmology can be an exemplar for other medical specialties and can really lead the way. And so over the course of the next hour, I'd like to tell you about some of the work that we've been doing and try and present my case in that regard. Now, Rola has already given a nice summary of my background, but just to explain that again, I'm a consultant ophthalmologist at Moorfields Eye Hospital in London, and I'm a retinal specialist, a medical retina specialist at Moorfields, so really dealing with macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, and the like. I'm also an associate professor at the Institute of Ophthalmology at University College London. And, you know, I feel very proud that I lead a nice and I think rapidly growing clinical research group at UCL and at Moorfields. And there's one other thing that I want to highlight, which I think is important, is that I do have a financial disclosure, which is that I act as a consultant, an external consultant for the artificial intelligence company called DeepMind. And some of the presentation that I'm going to give will concern the work that we have between Moorfields and DeepMind. And I think for those of you who haven't heard me speak before, you'll probably realize quickly that I am an enthusiastic proponent of AI. But I just want to highlight that I do have that financial bias. So please bear that in mind as the talk progresses. So why do we need artificial intelligence in ophthalmology? Why is it something that will not be a luxury, but will be a necessity in the coming years? Well, let me start by telling you about 3 problems. The first problem is this. We are drowning in the number of patients that we see in ophthalmology. And this is one of my favorite statistics, which is that in 2017, ophthalmology overtook orthopedics as the #1 busiest specialty in the National Health Service in the UK. In fact, nearly 10% of all clinic appointments in the UK are for eyes. That's nearly 10 million appointments per year. And that's a number that's been rising rapidly over the last 5 years. So if you look at the rate of change of something like orthopedics, which is #2, the curve is relatively flat. Whereas if you look at ophthalmology, the curve is like this. And of course, that's because of the aging population with diseases such as macular degeneration, but also because of increasing prevalence of systemic diseases such as diabetes. So, like I say, we're drowning in the number of patients that we have. Now, the problem then is that we see headlines such as this, and this is from the Daily Telegraph in the United Kingdom in January of this year. And unfortunately, there are some patients who are going blind because of delays in being seen and treated. And so there was a lot of media attention in the UK because there was a very, very tragic case in Southampton in the south of England of a woman in her 30s with glaucoma who needed some urgent glaucoma filtration surgery. And there were some delays in getting that surgery. And she was pregnant, and essentially she lost her sight because of those delays. So a particularly tragic case on multiple levels. And so this for me illustrates perfectly in one patient the challenges that we face. And I'm sure that these are challenges not just in the UK, but in many other countries around the world. Now, what's the second problem? Well, this is a paper that I was particularly interested in, a lovely paper that was published in the British Journal of Ophthalmology in, I think, around November of last year, from Frank Holtz and Robert Finger and their groups in Bonn. And it looked at the prevalence of age-related macular degeneration in Europe. Now, for me, this is a topic that's close to my heart because AMD is probably my main area of clinical expertise and my main area of clinical interest. It's also a topic that's very close to my heart because I happen to have done some of my own genetic testing with these consumer genetic kits, and so I've done the 23andMe testing. And interestingly, the only disease that I was found to be at increased risk for from the genetic testing that 23andMe did was AMD. So I feel I have some skin in the game for this condition. But in any event, this was a paper that came out at the end of last year. And I think sometimes when we look at these epidemiological studies, and they always talk about huge numbers of patients, and sometimes it's very easy for us to not pay attention to some of the details, because does it really matter if we have 100 million patients or 150 million patients with a certain disease? Now, what was interesting though in this case was that in the abstract, there was a single line that caught my attention. And so what that line said was 25% of those over the age of 60 years have early or intermediate AMD in Europe. So the first thing that I thought of was 60 is not old. 60 is like 50 these days, or you know, it's much younger than it was before. My parents are in their 60s. These are huge numbers of patients, and as the population gets older, this is only going to increase. Now, the third problem, and the last of the problems that I'll tell you about, that drives why we need artificial intelligence, is OCT. This is an OCT scan of my eye taken with the Cirrus Zeiss Cirrus machine a number of years ago. And OCT is my main area of clinical research interest. And I've spent, you know, more than 10 years of my life devoted to OCT. And of course, OCT has revolutionized the way that we diagnose and manage retinal diseases. Now, the problem, of course, though, is that we're doing huge numbers of OCT scans, and that presents considerable logistic challenges for us as a profession. So in Moorfields, where I'm based, in the main Moorfields Hospital in City Road, which you can see pictured here, we audit the number of OCT scans that we do on a regular basis. And in 2017, for example, when we looked at this in detail, and we recently published some of these results as a letter in the American Journal of Ophthalmology, what we found was we're actually doing about 1,000 OCT volume scans per day at Moorfields. And sometimes that's 1,200 or 1,300 OCT volume scans. So we're doing huge numbers of OCT scans, and the numbers are going up all the time. Now, a caveat to that is actually that number represents the fact that Moorfields does have a number of different sites. And also, this is not the number of patients, this is the number of eyes. So it would be half this number in terms of patients. But nevertheless, these are huge numbers. In fact, as we look now with an automated way to model these numbers, what we're seeing is that at Moorfields, we do about 1.2 million ophthalmic images per month. And so huge numbers of eye scans. So that's both a challenge and also an opportunity, because the huge amount of data that we generate is the perfect substrate for training artificial intelligence systems. Now, when we talk about AI systems, what are we talking about? Well, and why are people so excited about AI in the last 5 years? Well, it turns out that the excitement about AI is because of a new type of AI, which is called deep learning. And in 2015, Scientific American listed deep learning as one of their world-changing ideas of the year. So deep learning is a specific form of what we call machine learning, and machine learning is a part of a much broader category called AI. But actually, a lot of the time now, people inaccurately use the terms AI and deep learning interchangeably. Now, what is deep learning? Well, deep learning is really kind of like a rebranding of the term artificial neural networks. And artificial neural networks are a concept and a technology that have been around really since the late 1950s, when they were first called perceptrons. And artificial neural networks are computational models that superficially resemble the brain in the way that they process information. And I should highlight the word superficially. We mustn't overemphasize the resemblance to the brain, because it turns out the brain is much more complex and much more poorly understood than even these deep learning networks. And so what we do with a deep learning network is that we feed in digital information into the layers on the left, into the layer on the left. So what that might be, for example, could be a digital photograph, or it could be a video, or it could be an audio file. And so we feed that in a digital form, so it's in numbers. So in the context of a retinal photograph, for example, or a photograph of someone's face, that would be a two-dimensional array of pixels. So numbers in a grid that we feed into the layer on the left of the deep neural network. And then each succeeding layer of the network processes that information, so that ultimately the the computational model can create this abstract hierarchical representation of the data that's put in. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that it's very good at doing classification tasks using a process called supervised learning. So what you do is you feed lots of data into the model, and it will learn how to, for example, tell the difference between a cat and a dog. So you show it lots of pictures of cats and lots of pictures of dogs, and it can learn to classify the difference. And a key distinction from more classical machine learning techniques is that this doesn't necessarily involve feature engineering. So you don't have to teach it what the features of a cat are or the features of a dog are. But if you give it enough data, it will be able to make the distinction. Now, this is a short video. Hopefully this will play. Oh, maybe it's 1 second. Let me just give that a second. Okay, it's loading. Okay, so this is a short video. It may or may not actually play, but if you the website link is there, and all this was basically an actual representation of what a deep learning network with 3 layers actually looks like, and you would see a rotating version of this video. And the reason that I wanted to show this was to illustrate that, unlike in my previous picture, which shows a number of layers and a number of nodes in each layer and a number of connections, that representation is actually potentially misleading, because these neural networks, in fact, have many millions or even billions of connections and can have many hundreds of layers or even larger. And so the complexity of these deep neural networks is vast. And in fact, part of the reason that they've become successful in recent years is because we now have the computational power to actually utilize them. Now, how is deep learning? Why is there such hype around it? Well, in 2012, there was a contest in the computer vision world called the ImageNet contest. So nothing to do with medical imaging, but just computer vision. And what happened was that in 2012, that contest was won by a team that were using deep learning for the first time, and their performance was much better than all the other people in the team. And so what happened then was that all the major technology companies, from Google to Microsoft to Apple to Amazon to Facebook, all of the big companies began to realize, or began to pivot their companies towards using deep learning in their applications. So for example, it's now possible to use deep learning in your phones for image recognition. So you can take a picture of the flower and it will tell you what type of flower it is. Or you can hold your phone up to, if you go to your friend's house pre-coronavirus and you want to get their Wi-Fi code, you don't have to type it in, you just hold your phone up to it and it will automatically recognize it. So we've got now very powerful image recognition in our phones. We also use deep learning for translation and for things like speech recognition and speech generation. So for example, in my house, we have an Amazon Echo, and we use the voice assistant, and my young children have grown up in a world where it doesn't seem strange that they can just say, Alexa or Siri, play this song, or they can say, Alexa, set a timer for this, or order their food, or order something from Amazon in this way. But that all uses deep learning. Now, what we started to do in the last 5 years is look at the clinical and scientific applications of deep learning. And so one of the first major publications to look at the clinical applications of deep learning was a paper from Stanford, from Sebastian Thrun's group in Stanford, where they trained a deep learning network to be able to classify skin lesions as being benign or malignant. So what they did was they got about 130,000 photos of skin lesions where they knew that the diagnosis was benign or malignant, and they trained a neural network to make that classification. And what they were able to show in this paper was that when they evaluated the performance of this model, that the performance was as good or better than 21 board-certified US-trained dermatologists. Now think about what the implications of that are for dermatologists, for ophthalmologists, and for healthcare professionals, and most importantly for patients. And you can see that's featured on the cover of Nature, and it says lesions learned, AI powers detection of skin cancer. Now, before we get too excited about this, let me tell you that this type of approach is not yet being widely used in clinical practice. And in fact, there's lots and lots of caveats to this work and lots of ways that deep learning actually can be quite brittle in these sorts of clinical applications. Now, what about ophthalmology? Well, some of the first work in this regard came out in 2016. That was published in JAMA, and this is work from the Google Brain team in California, where they trained a deep learning network on retinal photographs to distinguish between referable and non-referable diabetic retinopathy. And they got very good performance on that. And they're now beginning the process of making that commercially available and FDA approved and CE marked. In fact, there are a number of other companies that are involved in this. So you have companies like IDX in the US that have an FDA approved autonomous AI system for diabetic retinopathy, and other companies such as iNuke and a number of others. So you can see that the use of deep learning for diabetic retinopathy screening is probably the most mature of the applications in ophthalmology, and in fact, probably in all of healthcare. Now, let me tell you a little bit about some other work that Google Brain did. And there aren't necessarily clinical applications for this, but I think it's very interesting to illustrate the power of deep learning. And so this is a paper that was published in Nature Biomedical Engineering in February of 2018. And basically in this paper, the team from Google Brain in California accessed the UK Biobank retinal photographs. So UK Biobank is a large cohort study based in the UK. And they tried to use deep learning to predict cardiovascular risk factors. And they got some interesting results, although the cohort didn't have perhaps enough patients at that time with myocardial infarctions and strokes and other conditions. Now, what was interesting and what immediately caught my eye and the eye of many others when we looked at this was that using deep learning, that the team from Google Brain were actually able to predict the age of patients to within 3 years just from the retinal photograph. And even more strangely, they could predict the gender, the biological sex of the person just from the retinal photograph. Now, you may sort of shrug your shoulders and say, well, what's the point of that? There are easier ways to tell if it's a man or a woman than applying AI to the retinal photograph. But of course, that misses the point. The point that the reason why people are excited is because actually, people like me and people like many of you listening, retinal specialists, will have often spent their whole careers looking obsessively at retinal photographs for very fine details on the scans to make diagnosis of rare genetic conditions or rare retinal diseases. But in fact, even experts such as us, such as many of the people listening, cannot begin to tell whether it's a man or a woman simply from looking at a retinal photograph. And so the fact that a deep learning algorithm can do that suggests that there may be other insights that we can draw from these images. Or perhaps we can use deep learning as a tool, now that we've detected this association, to begin to unpick what the algorithm is looking at. What are the biological reasons that it's able to do this? Now, that brings me to my work in this space. And so in July of 2016, I established a formal collaboration between Moorfields Eye Hospital and the artificial intelligence company DeepMind. Now, many of you will be familiar with DeepMind, but DeepMind were a company that were formed in 2012. And the interesting thing is that 2 of the 3 co-founders are from London, and 2 of the 3 co-founders are graduates of UCL, the university that Moorfields is affiliated with. Now, DeepMind were, like I say, founded in 2012. They got a lot of attention in 2014 because they were acquired by Google in 2014 and reputedly for about £400 million. Now, the exciting thing for me, and the reason why I approached them, is not only are they arguably the world's leading artificial intelligence research company, but also they're based in King's Cross in London. And if any of you have ever been to Moorfields, you'll know that that's just 2 stops away from Moorfields on the London Underground, on the tube. Now, the idea that I approached DeepMind with was not anything particularly novel, but it was simply that we would apply deep learning to OCT scans so that we could use deep learning to triage those patients with the most sight-threatening macular diseases to get them in front of retinal specialists like me at the soonest possible point, given all the logistical challenges that we face. Now, although we initiated the collaboration formally in the middle of 2016, in fact, I had approached DeepMind in July of 2015 when I read a profile of DeepMind in Wired magazine. And in that profile, I was particularly interested in this person here, and this is called Mustafa Suleiman. And Mustafa is one of the co-founders of DeepMind, and he was the head of their applied division. And what was interesting to me is that he was, born in London. His mother was a nurse on the National Health Service. He was really passionate about using AI for good in the world. And so in the article in Wired that I read, he said that we want to use our AI in healthcare or in climate change or in energy consumption or in any field where it can have massive benefit. And so that was when the light bulb went off for me, because I looked up Mustafa's details on LinkedIn, and I sent him a message saying, I'm a consultant at Moorfields. We're doing 1,000 OCT scans per day. There are people who are losing their sight because of delays in being seen and treated. Can we work together on this collaboration? And I was very fortunate in my timing because, within a few days, I found myself meeting up with my staff and talking about the project. So when I went to see him, he asked me all these questions like, how many OCT scans do you have in total? What proportion of them are with each disease? And of course, I didn't really know the answers to that, even though I knew that we had a lot of OCT scans. He also asked me, what's the file format? Can you make it into an open source file format? Can you aggregate the data? And what are the ethical and the governance requirements for us to work together? So I actually had to go away and work with our team at Moorfields to spend a lot of time beginning to answer those questions. And so, in fact, when we had answered all those questions, we were in a position to put in place a research collaboration agreement between Moorfields and DeepMind, so we could share about 1 million anonymized retrospective OCT scans with DeepMind. Now, as you can imagine, that is a potentially sensitive topic because it's sharing data from the National Health Service with a commercial entity, with an industry partner. And of course, DeepMind are a company that are owned by Google and by Alphabet. And so That's something that we were very aware of from the very earliest stage. And so we wanted to be as transparent with people as we could. So there's a section of the Moorfields website which is dedicated to this partnership, and you can look and you can still go there now. And there's questions and answers, and so people can find out about the project. And if they want to opt out of their OCT scans being used, they can contact our information governance team, and so on and so forth. We've also tried to be open as open as possible about what our scientific plans were. And so before we did any research whatsoever, we published our study protocol in an open access journal. And I'm also really proud that you know, we've been so focused on patient and public engagement and transparency from the earliest possible stage. We've had patient engagement events, and this is a patient of mine called Elaine Manna, and Elaine has spoken very eloquently about you know, her situation. She has age-related macular degeneration. She lost the sight in her left eye before anti-VEGF treatment became available for this condition. And then in 2012 or 2013, she started to lose sight in her good eye, and she went to her local optometrist, and her optometrist said, I think you might be getting wet AMD in your good eye, but there are now some treatments available. You need to get an urgent appointment to be seen. Now, the first appointment that she got, the first urgent appointment, was 6 weeks later. Now, of course, if that was a family member of mine, I would want them seen and treated within 6 days, not within 6 weeks. Now, fortunately, she was able to get into Moorfields to be seen much quicker than that and start anti-VEGF treatment, and she's responded very well to that treatment. But it was dealing with people like Elaine and trying to improve things for people like Elaine that inspired this collaboration. I'm also really proud about the work we've done with focus groups. I'm really proud of the support that we've got from the major eye disease charities in the UK with every stage of this research. So that was 2016. And so it was very exciting after much hard work in August and September of 2018 to publish the first results of this collaboration. And so it was a great privilege to publish this in the journal Nature Medicine, which is the #1 journal in the world for translational medicine. And you can see that there's 34 co-authors on the paper. So we've got senior scientists from DeepMind. So this is jointly led by myself and a guy called Olaf Ronneberger from DeepMind. We also have senior clinicians from Moorfields, you know, world-leading retina specialists like Kathy Egan and Adnan Tufail and John Sim and Peng Ko and others. And then scientists from UCL, people like Geraint Rees, Hugh Montgomery, Rosalind Rain, and others. So it was a really big team effort. It wouldn't have been possible without the contributions from all of those groups. Now, it was also very exciting because it was published, it was not just published in Nature Medicine, but it was on the cover of Nature Medicine. And of course, this being artificial intelligence, there's a lot of hype around AI. And so it got a lot of media attention, both in London and the UK and globally. Now, the reason that I show this is because, you know, it was very exciting to see a headline such as this in the Evening Standard, one of the main newspapers in London, but also a little bit awkward, because the fact of the matter is this algorithm has not saved the sight of a single person yet. And actually, we're still in the process of implementing this algorithm in the real world. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that shortly. So what did we do? Well, we created a novel framework, which basically on the left here takes in the raw OCT volume scan, and it feeds it into 2 different neural networks. The first is a segmentation network, and we've trained that with nearly 900 manually segmented OCT scans. So what we've done is we had a big team who manually delineated every bit of intraretinal fluid, subretinal fluid, and other disease features in the scans, so that the first neural network became capable of delineating all the pathology on the scans. That information was then fed into a second neural network, which was trained with about 15,000 classification labels. So we would say, this is a macular hole, this is a macular hole, this is a macular hole, or this is central serous retinopathy, or all the different diseases. So finally then, the output is two main things. It's a referral suggestion. So it will say urgent referral, semi-urgent referral, routine referral, or observation only, or it will make a diagnosis. So it looks at 10 different features on the OCT scan, all the big things that you would expect a retinal specialist or most ophthalmologists to be able to diagnose. So choroidal neovascularization, macular edema, full thickness hole, partial thickness hole, central serous retinopathy, vitreomacular traction, geographic atrophy, drusen, and epiretinal membrane. So here's an example of the algorithm in action. This is in a patient with diabetes. And what you can see on the bottom row is the raw OCT scan, which has been fed into the algorithm. And the first neural network has segmented about 15 different features on the scan. Now, although in this one, the main things that you can see is that it's segmented the RPE and intraretinal fluid, and that's the main thing. And then in the second and third rows, you can see that there's a thickness map for the neurosensory retina. There's a thickness map for intraretinal fluid. And then on the top row, you can see that it says diagnosis probability, macular edema, 98.5%. And in this case, it recommends a semi-urgent referral, because that's the standard of care in the diabetic retinopathy screening program in the UK. Here's another case, or here's another, the video is not running here, but this is a patient with age-related macular degeneration. And what you can see on the third row is that it has segmented a fibrovascular pigment epithelium detachment. And then on the row directly above that, you can see a pool of subretinal fluid, which is around the scan. In the top right, you can see the posterior hyaloid, which has been segmented, although the video is not playing, but you can see actually on the bottom row how the algorithm has been able to delineate the fine structure of the detached posterior hyaloid. Then in the top left, it says diagnosis probability CNV 99.5%, and it recommends an urgent referral. Oh, sorry, I should have just hit play on the video. And so you may be able to see then, it may be covered off, but you can see that there's a fibrovascular PED at the bottom.
Dr. Keen, I think we're getting some issues with the voice. Can you just make sure that the connection for the mic is okay, because you're coming in and out.
Okay. Let me just turn off my video. Can you hear me? Am I still breaking up?
I think it's better now. Yeah, it's better.
Okay. Okay. I think it's the Wi-Fi connection on my part is the problem.
I can share the video with you at the end if you like.
Okay. This is a patient with geographic atrophy from AMD, but I'll move on from this one. So once we had created this model, we had to evaluate its performance. And so what we did was we collected a retrospective data set of 1,000 patients that had presented to Moorfields for the first time and had a macular OCT scan at first presentation. And we ran the algorithm on all 1,000 cases. And we looked at its errors on the referral and its errors on the different diagnostic classifications. And so this was the result. So the error rate you can see on the y-axis there. And so lower is better. So it had a 5.5% error rate on the referral decisions. Now, we then wanted to compare that performance against 8 human experts. So we got experts 1 to 4 who are consultant ophthalmologists at Moorfields who are retina specialists, and experts 5 to 8 who are optometrists who work at Moorfields. And we basically asked them to look at all 1,000 OCTs and to make a referral decision based just on the OCTs. Now, how did they do? Well, actually the algorithm did better than all 8 human experts, except for experts 1 and 2. And so the algorithm did better than experts 1 and 2, but it wasn't statistically significantly better. And I should highlight that those experts are world-leading retina specialists with more than 20 years of experience in looking at scans. Now, however, just to be clear, this is not fair to the human experts. And whenever you see AI hype that says, you know, superhuman performance or beats the best experts, usually when you look into the details, you find that the human experts are not doing something that they do in their everyday clinical practice, or they're doing something with incomplete information. So with one arm tied behind their back. And so in real life, the human experts would never make a triage decision based on an OCT alone. And in fact, in real life, even in these virtual clinics that we have, they would always have a retinal photograph as well as an OCT. They would also know a visual acuity, and they would typically have a few lines of history. And so to make it fair to the humans, we actually got them to look at all of these scans again, but gave them additional information, all the information they would normally have. And in fact, that did improve the performance of all the human experts, so that the best expert, expert number 1, was actually able to equal the model performance. Now you may wonder, on the right of the picture, expert number 8, why did they have a 24% error rate on referral decisions for OCTs? And this was an optometrist with about 1 year of experience. And actually, they weren't missing urgent cases. And we give all the details of this in our supplementary material. But the problem was that they were over-referring non-urgent cases. So they would see an epiretinal membrane with a little bit of thickening, and they would say urgent referral. And so they're making a lot of errors in that regard. The next question you might ask is, what did the algorithm get wrong? And I won't go into the details here, but the key thing that the BBC picked up on was that AI did not miss a single urgent case. You can see me in the picture there examining Elaine Mama's eyes. Now, the AI system did not miss a single urgent case. You may wonder, what did the best human experts miss? What did they get wrong? And what was the gold standard? So the gold standard that we used was the diagnosis that was made when the patients were able to get a fluorescein and an indocyanine green and were treated and followed up for a 6-month period. So that was our gold standard. Now, in fact, the best human experts, the cases that they got wrong were very ambiguous cases. And actually, when we looked again, we saw that actually maybe they were right and our gold standard was incorrect. Now, what was interesting was that was the same for the AI. Now, I think that this is going to be very useful in the context of medical education. And a book that I have been very inspired by is Deep Thinking by Gary Kasparov. And what Gary Kasparov says is that at the end of, after he lost to Deep Blue, you know, people didn't stop playing chess, but instead, young chess players began to use computer chess engines to train. And that had an effect where you now have a lot more grandmasters at a younger age than before. And you also have a much wider geographical distribution of chess expertise. And I think one of the biggest impacts that we'll see of AI is actually making human experts better at a medical image interpretation. So if it took me 10 years to become an OCT expert, I'll bet you that some bright person in some other country in the world may be able to get as good or better than I am in 10 months if they have the right data sets and the right tools. Now, where do we go next with this? Well, we need to bridge the AI chasm. And what's the AI chasm? Well, it's one thing to do a cool demo of an AI algorithm and publish it, a nice paper. It's a very different thing to actually have something that you can deploy at scale in the world. And we've been working on the technical maturity of our system. And about a year ago, we did a live demo of the system at Wired Health in London. And essentially, we were able to rewrite the system from the Nature Medicine paper so that it was able to work in real time with a fraction of the power of the computing power and a fraction of the resources and a fraction of the time required. And we did it live at Wired Health. So really, we're at a stage now where the algorithm that we described in the Nature Medicine paper, that's like a Formula One car or a concept car that we use to break the world record. But now we're thinking about, how do we make a production car? How do we make an algorithm that can be used by millions of people? And that's quite a challenge. We're also interested in the clinical validation of the algorithm. And this is a paper from the Lancet Digital Health that my colleague Alistair Denniston and I published at the end of last year, and others. And in this systematic review, we highlighted that actually there's a lot of methodological issues with the vast majority of deep learning papers that have currently been published. And in fact, less than 1% of them are actually methodologically sound, far less than that. And so one of the things that we're doing now in the work between Moorfields and Google and DeepMind is thinking about how we can validate our algorithm on data sets from patients all around the world to make sure that it works not just in Moorfields, but in every continent of the planet. We're also thinking about what are the new pathways of care. Moorfields is going to be building a new hospital beginning next year, and how do we have pathways that can accommodate these technologies? How can we bring world-leading ophthalmic expertise closer to people's communities and closer to people's homes? So for example, in Saudi, how can you bring the world-leading expertise that you have at Kekesh closer to people in their communities? And I think that AI can allow that to happen. Now, in the last, I've already talked quite a bit, but in the last 5 minutes of my talk, I'd just like to tell you about something else that I'm very excited about, and then hopefully we'll have 5 minutes for questions at the end. And that's something that we call automated deep learning. So what do I mean by that? Well, initially, much of my work and much of the work in Moorfields in AI has been with an industry collaborator, first with DeepMind and more recently with Google Health. We've also begun to develop a network of academic AI collaborators at UCL and Cambridge and at City University and even more widely. But what I'm really excited about is the development of AI systems by clinical researchers who don't have AI expertise using automated deep learning platforms. Now, why am I excited by this? Well, at the moment, or until recently, if you wanted to develop deep learning systems, you need a lot of computing power and you need a lot of specialized expertise. And so I was really excited then in November of 2017 when I saw this article in the New York Times about building AI that can build AI. And basically, this article highlights the fact that each of the major tech companies has now developed platforms for automated deep learning. So for code-free deep learning. So you can train image classification tools, for example, with simple drag and drop interfaces. And these are really, I think, quite powerful. So when I saw this, I was tremendously excited because I should explain, although I do AI research, I don't have any computer science or engineering background myself. So what we got when we saw this, we got the idea that we would use one of these platforms or a number of these platforms on publicly available medical image data sets. So we downloaded some publicly available skin lesion data sets, some chest x-rays from adults and chest x-rays from children, some publicly available OCTs, and some publicly available diabetic retinopathy fundus photographs. And the exciting thing was that using these platforms, we were able to get results that were comparable to the state of the art within days. And this was by members of my research group who do not have any specialized coding experience or deep learning experience at all. Now, we were able to publish that in the Lancet Digital Health in September of 2019. And this is one of the papers that I'm most proud of. And we were honored that one of my heroes, Dr. Eric Topol from California, tweeted that this will be regarded as a classic paper when AI becomes part of every medical school curriculum. So I do recommend that if you're interested, it definitely is worth taking a detailed read of. Now, an interesting part of this is that in the review process in the Lancet, we got this comment from the editor of the Lancet at the revision stage. She said, "One point that we hope you will be able to address in the revision is to emphasize that these tools will not necessarily replace AI experts." And this made me smile a little bit, because for the last 4 or 5 years, when I give talks about AI to doctors or healthcare professionals, people are always worried about whether they will be replaced. So it was kind of amusing to me that the tables were turned with the use of these automated deep learning systems. Now, why do I think this is revolutionary? Well, I think that this could be a bicycle for the mind. And what does that mean? Well, in 1973, there was the Scientific American published this famous figure where it basically plotted different animals and different machines and plotted the energy that they used per body weight per distance traveled. And they looked at a fruit fly, and they looked at a jet engine, and they looked at all these different creatures. Well, what was exciting was that the most efficient was a man or woman on a bicycle, which you can see down at the bottom row. Now, this was something that a lot of people became very interested in, and Steve Jobs said, when we invented the personal computer, we created a new kind of bicycle for the mind. And this is an advertisement for Apple Computer from August 1980. Now, the interesting thing at the time was that when Steve Jobs, who was in his 20s at the time, and Steve Wozniak were building Apple Computer, people thought that the idea of a personal computer was crazy. So the existing computer industry said, we build mainframe computers for corporations to do their payroll. Why would anybody want to have a computer in their own home? And furthermore, the personal computers that Apple are making are primitive. They don't do very much. Why would anybody want that? But Steve Jobs had the vision to recognize that if you empower people with the personal computer, they will come up with hundreds or thousands or even millions of applications that the original computer engineers would never conceive by themselves. Now, I think that these automated deep learning platforms can do the same thing for clinical research. So what I would say to you is that now is the time to move towards democratization and industrialization of AI, because I think that healthcare professionals, ophthalmologists and doctors and other healthcare professionals have to be central to the development of AI in healthcare. And so I would say, if not you, then who? So if you're interested in this, you could read my article, you can download some public data sets, and you can start playing around with these tools tonight. And I guarantee you that you'll start to see some interesting results. Now, I would say 2 caveats. The first caveat is don't use images from your own institution unless you have the appropriate approvals. So try it with publicly available data sets. And the second caveat is, and just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that these could be used to treat patients anytime soon, because there's lots of cautions about using bespoke AI systems for direct patient care. There's even more cautions about using these platforms for direct patient care. However, there is undoubtedly a lot of clinical research applications that we could begin to explore almost straight away. Now, Livia Fess and Siegfried Wagner are the joint first authors on this paper, and they were the 2 members of my research group who actually used the platform and who didn't have the coding experience. So coming to my last slide or so, I think that AI has the potential to transform healthcare. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about my vision for that, there was an essay that I wrote with Eric Topol in the Lancet in December of 2019. And I think that is available open source. And then lastly, what are the next steps? Well, look, there's a lot of excitement about this technology, but it has to have robust clinical validation. There's potential for AI-assisted science. And I think we're entering a phase where it's going to move away from artisanal, specialized use of these tools towards more widespread use by healthcare professionals. And then lastly, if you'd like to get in touch, my email address is p.keen@ucl.ac.uk, and this is my Twitter handle as well. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Keen. A very inspiring presentation. I'm sure it's stimulating a lot of questions, but I feel that we're slightly running out of time.
Apologies. Apologies. I talk too long. I'm Irish. I talk too much.
We're glad that you gave us the opportunity. I'm gonna give you start with the questions just in the sake of time. So there's a lot of questions about how you describe your results reliably, knowing that that AI has the issue of the black box, not knowing exactly. Sorry, not. The issue of the black box in AI. I'm sorry, this was a call on my side.
Yeah, so this is a big issue because well, so one of the things, our paper, we tried not to make it a black box. So it will make a classification, but it will also show you the segmentation. Now we think that's important because if it's a black box, imagine a situation where you're seeing a patient and the AI system is telling you you must inject this patient. And when you look at the scan, it looks completely normal to you. You could be worried that if you don't inject the patient and you're wrong, that you could be sued because you have gone against the system. But if you have interpretability built in, you can actually see if the system is making an error, and that would give you a clearer rationale to overrule the system.
Okay. Another question is about the data. So how much, let's say, an image recognition model, how much data you think you need to build a model?
So one of the things I've learned from interacting with AI specialists is that they will never give you a straight answer to this question. They always say the more data, the better. I would tell you that ophthalmologists and doctors think that some data sets are large. Like they say, we've got the world's largest data set of this retinal disease and we've got 100 patients. That's not large. Actually, you probably need about 1,000 cases of each class that you want to predict. So if you're training a diabetic retinopathy software and the two classes are referable plus non-referable, you probably need 1,000 cases of each as a ballpark. It may be less or it may be more, depending on the complexity of the task.
A question comes from our glaucoma colleagues talking about the fundus photos of the disc. You think this translates to it as well?
Yes, but glaucoma is much more complex, isn't it? So the problem with glaucoma is that I don't think glaucoma specialists even have universal agreement on what is glaucoma.
I don't think they want. They want to hear.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'm too honest in saying that, but I think that there's definitely applications in triaging of referrals to glaucoma specialists. And then the glaucoma specialists would be the ones who make the final diagnosis. And then in glaucoma, what I would be really interested in is, can we use AI to predict those patients that will do badly even with the optimal current treatment? Or can we predict those patients who will be totally fine even if we do nothing? And I think that's where deep learning will work well.
A question about your New England article about how many classes did you have? And they were saying that you had an imbalance between the number of the classes of urgent, referable, and not referable. I think this is.
So
how did you solve this?
Well, no. So we actually there was 4 classes of referral and 10 classes of diagnosis, and I'm not sure where they're talking about the imbalance, but in the actual in the training set, or no, in the test set that we described where we had 1,000 cases, we actually stratified. So we had 250 urgent, 250 semi-urgent, now the thing is that is not necessarily representative of real life. And so now we're doing studies to actually look where we have a different disease prevalences, how that will affect the accuracy.
That's cool. A question about models and other diseases, looking at Alzheimer and dementia and Parkinson and OCT. How do you see going forward with those kind of?
So there's a member of my research group called Siegfried Wagner, and he's leading a project called the ALZ Eye study for Alzheimer's eye. And there was an article written in The Economist in December about this work. We have now linked every OCT scan at Moorfields and every retinal photograph at Moorfields with a central UK database. So we know every patient who's had a retinal scan at Moorfield who has gone on to develop Alzheimer's or other causes of dementia. So we have about 15,000 patients who've gone on to develop dementia who have retinal scans done. And we're now in the process of trying to develop models to predict dementia from those scans. So I hope it will work, but I don't yet have the answer to that.
A question about the applicability. As an example, would the gender and age prediction obtained by the people with a variety of retinal diseases, or does the algorithm need additional training for each particular pathology, meaning that it differentiates between the disease and the sex differently between each disease?
I think I don't really know the answer to that. I think most of the scans in UK Biobank were of normal eyes. So it's not clear that the algorithm would work in the same way if it was in diabetic eyes or in AMD eyes or other things. So that's still future work.
A question about Google. People are generally skeptical about the tracking and the advertisement that are targeted. So what do you think in terms of the ethical issues with patients' privacy data managed by a company like Google?
Yeah, I think it's entirely appropriate that people ask those questions, and we have tried to be transparent about it. I just faced a situation where my patients were, losing sight, and I was just desperate for things to do, and so that's why I initiated the collaboration. We have taken we've put a lot of safeguards in place to respect privacy. So we anonymized the scans, but also we've anonymized the clinical metadata. So, for example, if we have one patient who's 100 years old in our data set, we don't give the ages. We say above 90 years, or we say 70 to 75 years. We don't give the dates of the visits. We say the first visit was at this time, and the next was 4 weeks later or 8 weeks later. If we had some rare diseases where we had less than 5 cases or less than 10 cases at Moorfields, we didn't include them at all, because there would be some risk. If you're the only patient in the world who has this disease, then maybe you could be re-identified. So we anonymize the data to the best of our ability. We then also put in place safeguards. So we have contractual safeguards with Google, so that they are not allowed to link the data to other data sets, and they are not allowed to attempt to re-identify the data sets. So they would be breaking their legal obligations if they tried to do that. We also give patients the ability to opt out. as well, up to the point where the data is anonymized. Because once it's anonymized, we can no longer identify them in the scans. But in the last 4 years, we've had about 10 patients have contacted Moorfields to opt out of the research, and none of those patients actually had an OCT scan at Moorfields. So it was a little bit of a moot point, but it's something we take very, very seriously. So we just try to be as transparent as we can about this work, and hopefully it will lead to a lot of benefits for patients.
A question about about the open source data. Do you think it's a valid way to build a model for a local algorithm? And I'm going to link it to another question where people are. I see a lot of your the papers that you publish has a lot of collaborators. Do you think that a project, a big project on building a model, is it mandatory to have, or let's say, is it not feasible to have it if you don't have a big group of collaborators with different data?
So I think that making the data set as widely available as possible is very important and beneficial for our patients. One thing I want to highlight about the collaboration with Google is that we have not exclusively shared the data with them, and the same data that we've shared, we can also share with other people. So it's not exclusive. Now, and I think every effort that people make to make data sets available to researchers around the world is really powerful. Now, the problem is that some of the current data sets that are publicly available are limited data sets. And so if you have a diabetic retinopathy data set from a hospital in Paris, for example, and it's taken from patients who are about to undergo vitrectomy surgery or who are already in a hospitalized system because they've been referred from screening, that may not be representative of a low disease prevalence population, or it may not be representative at all of a Saudi or Middle Eastern population. There is no guarantee it will work at all in different populations. So it's crucial that we have data trained on appropriate populations, because otherwise maybe it'll work on an Irish eye, but it won't work on a Saudi eye, and we have to avoid
that. A question about developing an AI platform. If you want to develop it for a specific condition, do using various fundus images influence the model that you eventually have? Because I can see that all of your studies included Heidelberg, Topcon.
Yeah. So the short answer is yes. That these deep learning systems are very, very brittle, and they will work well in data that's similar to their training data, and most of them won't work well if the training data is different. So for example, if you show it an OCT scan from Zeiss, it won't work on a Heidelberg OCT scan. Or even if you have a fundus photo from one device, it might not work on another device at all. So you have to be very, very careful about that problem.
So what do you do to solve the issue of having limited data? Whether it's because you don't have a lot of data, or you have a rare disease. I've been seeing, I know you've answered it in a way or another, but probably it would be better if we address it.
Yeah. So so one of the things is in the paper in Nature Medicine, we showed that we could retrain the algorithm for Heidelberg scans from Topcon with only the technical approach we took with the segmentation network meant that we only required a small number of images to update the device. So that was one approach. In answer to your second question, though, if you have a rare disease, the best way to do it is to have a collaboration with others where you can get a lot of images. together to train the algorithms. That's the best way. And so that's why you see that there was a paper in the New England Journal last week where they trained an algorithm to diagnose papilledema from fundus photos, and it involved, I think, 10 or more different centers around the world. Now, if you don't have that, there are other techniques that could be useful, like generating synthetic data, but they are not really proven, and they're probably not as effective as having the real thing.
I think we've already we're over time already, and I'm
yes.
That we have a lot of excitement from a lot of the listeners, but we're trying to keep at least our within the range of the acceptable. I have Dr. Adel Akeely. He's our CEO. I think he wanted to add something, and I leave the mic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adel, and thank you, Dr. Akeely, for a very interesting topic and a presentation on an up-to-date topic and something that we are very keen on at KK.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Actually we're having some talks with DeepMind and Google on collaborating with them in our own AI projects within KK, and we still have not finalized that area of collaboration. This is definitely a very important topic for all of us, especially in countries where there are limited resources in terms of professionals who can see patients, and especially in countries that spread over a wide area and a wide distribution, and the doctors and consultants distribution is limited to the main centers and the big cities. So this is an excellent technology. I have just one quick question. You mentioned something very important, that it's very important for us to collaborate with the researchers and have the data sets and the pictures available for them to study them. But how can you then balance this, knowing that at the end, all of this is going to be used for a commercial, how can you balance that? Sometimes you have lots of knowledge and data that you would like to share it, but you know that this is going to a company who's going to use it to gain financially out of it, which is reasonable and acceptable, and nobody's against it. But there will be no concessions to countries with limited resources. The institution even gave the data sets.
So, I mean, this is a very complex topic, and I spend a lot of time engaging with the policymakers in the UK and to try and answer this. I don't think there's any straightforward answer. I would say it's very important that data is not shared exclusively. So if you have the world's best data set of patients from the Middle East, then it's okay to share that with an industry partner, because ultimately, if that's going to be used to develop a commercial product, it will require an industry collaborator to have something that can be used in patients, because it will require a lot of resources to get FDA approval or CE marking or other regulatory approval. But I don't think it should be shared exclusively. And I think it's also important that in the discussions with the industry collaborators, that the value of the data is some value of that data is captured by the institutions that have created that data. And so the complexity is thinking about how to value the data. So it could be that the data is licensed for a certain amount of money, or it could be that if a product becomes available, that the institution will have free use of that product in the future, or there's a lot of other different models that come from this. So I think non-exclusivity and then transparency and telling your patients what you're doing with the data is the most important thing.
Great. One last question. Is there a role of ethnicity in the readings of AI? Would the readings be different for our patient, for example, than if the system is developed on Caucasians or other ethnicity?
Very, very likely. Very, very likely. The AI systems have outside healthcare have already been shown that they don't work as well in certain ethnic groups. And this will also be the same in healthcare. Now, this, in some ways, this is a positive thing for institutions like KCASH, is because actually the most important thing will be the data that you have about Saudi and about Middle Eastern patients, because the algorithms that are trained on data from more fields probably won't work as well on these other data sets. Oh,
we can't hear you, Dr. Raji.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's been a great talk and a pleasure to have you with us as part of our Global Education Forum series of lectures. And we do look forward to hosting you personally in Saudi very soon and at KCASH.
I would love that. I'm really looking forward to visiting as soon as I can.
Well, hopefully very soon. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Piers. You made me very proud as a UCL alumna that actually we have a contemporary who has reached such great heights. It was quite an inspiring talk, and I'm speaking on behalf of everybody here. We really enjoyed spending this hour with you, and as Dr. Raj said, we look forward pretty much to hosting you here in Riyadh. Once again, thank you everybody for attending this exciting talk, and we'll see you next time in Riyadh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.